Listen carefully, because this is not just a message. It's a mirror, a revelation. And for some, it may be the first time you truly understand what you've been carrying your entire life. There are wounds that bleed, and then there are wounds that stay silent. The most dangerous wounds are not the ones people can see. They are the ones that shape how you see yourself. A daughter raised by narcissistic parents does not just grow up. She adapts, she survives, she performs, and often she forgets who she really is. You see, a narcissistic parent does not simply raise a child. They create an environment where love is conditional, where approval is currency, and where identity is slowly replaced with expectation. A daughter in that environment learns very early that being herself is not enough. She learns that love must be earned, that silence is safer than expression, and that perfection is the only path to temporary acceptance. And here's the truth most people won't tell you. The impact doesn't end when childhood ends. It doesn't disappear when she becomes an adult. It follows her into her decisions, her relationships, her confidence, and even into the quiet moments when she's alone with her thoughts. Because when a child is raised in a home where her emotions are dismissed, she grows into a woman who questions her own feelings. When she is constantly criticized, she becomes her own harshest judge. When love is inconsistent, she begins to chase it in places that were never meant to fulfill her. But hear me clearly, what was done to you may have shaped you, but it does not have the authority to define you. There is a difference between being shaped and being controlled. And many daughters have lived their lives believing that the voice in their head, the one that doubts, criticizes, and minimizes, is their own voice. But it isn't. It is an echo of words spoken over them, repeated so often that it became internalized as truth. And the danger of that echo is this: it convinces you to shrink in places where you were meant to rise. It convinces you to settle where you were designed to grow. It convinces you to question your worth when your worth was never supposed to be up for debate. A narcissistic parent often operates from their own emptiness, their own need for control, validation, and superiority. But instead of addressing their own brokenness, they project it onto the child. The daughter becomes the reflection of everything they need, perfect when it benefits them, invisible when it doesn't, and never fully accepted for who she truly is. And so she learns to wear masks. She becomes who people need her to be. She reads the room before she expresses herself. She apologizes even when she has done nothing wrong. She overgives, overthinks, and overcompensates, not because she is weak, but because she was trained to survive emotionally unpredictable environments. But survival is not the same as living, Sasatse. At some point, every daughter who has walked this path must come to a realization: who am I without the expectations placed on me? And that question can feel terrifying, because when your identity has been built around pleasing others, discovering yourself feels like stepping into the unknown. But that unknown is where your freedom lives. You were never created to live as a reflection of someone else's ego. You were not designed to spend your life chasing validation from people who are incapable of giving you unconditional love. You were not born to carry emotional burdens that were never yours to begin with. There is a power in awareness. The moment you recognize the pattern, you interrupt its control. The moment you identify the voice, you begin to separate from it. And the moment you choose to question the lies, you open the door to truth. And truth sounds different. Truth does not say you are not enough. Truth says you are always enough. You were just surrounded by people who could not see it. Truth does not say you must earn love. Truth says real love does not require you to perform. Truth does not say stay small to be accepted. Truth says grow into who you were created to be, even if it makes others uncomfortable. You see, healing is not about blaming. It's about understanding. It's about recognizing what shaped you so you can consciously choose what continues with you and what ends with you. And that is where your power is. Because the story does not end with what happened to you. The story continues with what you decide to do next. You can continue the cycle or you can break it. You can live in the shadow of your past or you can step into the authority of your future. And breaking that cycle doesn't mean perfection. It means awareness, intention and courage. It means learning to trust your voice again. It means allowing yourself to feel without guilt. It means setting boundaries without apology. It means understanding that protecting your peace is not selfish, it is necessary. There will be moments when you doubt yourself, moments when that old voice tries to return, moments when you feel the pull to go back into familiar patterns. But remember this, growth feels unfamiliar because you were conditioned to accept less. And every time you choose yourself, you are rewriting something that was once written for you. You are not the pain you experienced. You are not the labels placed on you. You are not the expectations that confined you. You are the decision to rise beyond it. And the most powerful thing you can do is this: stop asking for permission to become who you were always meant to be. Because your life was never supposed to be controlled by someone else's limitations. It was always meant to be led by your own truth. And that truth is waiting for you to finally claim it. Identity is a powerful thing. It is the foundation upon which every decision, every relationship, and every dream is built. But when a daughter is raised in the environment of narcissistic parenting, identity is not something she is allowed to discover. It becomes something she is forced to construct for survival. And understand this clearly. There is a difference between discovering who you are and becoming who you must be to be accepted. From a very young age, she begins to sense that love in her environment is not freely given. It is measured, evaluated, and often withheld. She realizes, sometimes without words, that being herself does not guarantee connection. So she studies. She studies tone, reactions, moods, and expectations. She learns when to speak, when to stay silent, when to shine, and when to shrink. This is not natural development. This is adaptation. And adaptation, when it is driven by fear rather than freedom, slowly replaces identity with performance. She becomes the good daughter, but not because she understands goodness, because she understands approval. She excels, not because she is passionate, but because she is seeking validation. She behaves not because she feels safe, but because she fears rejection. Every action becomes calculated, not out of manipulation, but out of a deep subconscious need to maintain connection in an emotionally unpredictable environment. Now listen carefully. This is where the transformation begins to take place. When a child consistently receives praise only when she meets expectations and criticism when she expresses individuality, she begins to internalize a dangerous belief. Who I am is not enough, but what I do might be. That belief becomes the blueprint of her identity. And over time, she stops asking, who am I? And starts asking, what do they want me to be? Harmony. That question will follow her into adulthood. You will find her in rooms full of people, smiling, contributing, achieving. But internally, she is asking the same question she asked as a child. Am I enough now? And the tragedy is this: no matter how much she accomplishes, the answer never fully settles. Because performance can earn applause, but it can never produce peace. You see, performance is exhausting. It requires constant awareness of others, constant adjustment, constant pressure to maintain an image. It leaves no room for authenticity because authenticity carries risk, and risk was never safe in her upbringing. So she learns to wear masks, different masks for different environments. One for family, one for friends, one for work, one for relationships. She becomes skilled, so skilled that people admire her adaptability, her strength, her ability to handle everything. But what they don't see is the cost. What they don't see is the silent question beneath it all. If I stop performing, will I still be loved? And tantins and contesti biki an. And that question is not weakness, it is the result of conditioning. Because when love is tied to performance, authenticity feels like a threat. Now let me take you deeper. A daughter in this environment often becomes hyper aware of others, but disconnected from herself. She knows how to read people, how to anticipate needs, how to adjust her behavior, but she struggles to identify her own desires. Ask her what she wants and she may hesitate. Not because she has no desires, but because she was never given the space to explore them freely. Her identity was shaped externally, not internally. And when identity is built externally, it becomes unstable. It depends on approval, feedback, and validation. Remove those and she feels lost, not because she is empty, but because she was never taught to anchor herself from within. This is why you will often see her overthinking, overanalyzing, replaying conversations in her mind, questioning her choices, seeking reassurance. It is not because she lacks intelligence. It is because she was trained to doubt her own inner voice. And here is the most critical truth you must understand. When you are trained to perform for acceptance, you begin to abandon yourself. Not all at once, not dramatically, but slowly, subtly, over time. You ignore your feelings because they might cause conflict. You silence your opinions because they might not be accepted. You suppress your needs because they might be seen as too much. Yes, and in doing so, you create a version of yourself that is acceptable to others but unfamiliar to you. That is the cost of performance-based identity. But listen, this is not where the story ends. This is where awareness begins. Because the moment you recognize that your identity has been shaped by performance, you gain the power to question it. And questioning is the first step toward reclaiming. You begin to ask different questions. Not what do they expect from me, but what do I truly want? Not how do I maintain approval, but what aligns with my values. Not who do I need to be for them. But who am I when no one is watching? Those questions may feel uncomfortable at first, even unfamiliar, because for so long your focus was outward, not inward. But discomfort is not a sign that you are wrong. It is a sign that you are stepping into territory you were never allowed to explore. And that territory is where your true identity lives. Reclaiming your identity is not about rebellion. It is about alignment. It is about slowly removing the layers that were placed on you and rediscovering what has always been within you. It means allowing yourself to have preferences, allowing yourself to say no without guilt, allowing yourself to rest without feeling unworthy, allowing yourself to express emotions without fear of rejection. These may seem like small things, but they are foundational, because identity is not built in grand moments. It is built in consistent choices to honor yourself. Now understand this, when you begin to shift from performance to authenticity, not everyone will understand. Some may even resist, because the version of you they were used to was predictable, accommodating, and easy to control. But growth is not about maintaining comfort for others. It is about establishing truth within yourself. And truth does not require performance. Truth is stable. It is grounded. It does not fluctuate based on approval. It does not shrink to fit expectations. It stands even when it stands alone. You were never meant to live a life defined by constant adjustment. You were never meant to measure your worth by how well you meet someone else's standards. You were never created to perform your way into belonging. Belonging begins with you. It begins when you decide that your value is not up for negotiation. It begins when you understand that your identity is not something to earn. It is something to discover and protect. And yes, the process takes time, because unlearning years of conditioning does not happen overnight. There will be moments of doubt, moments when the old patterns try to return, moments when performance feels easier than authenticity. But every time you choose authenticity, even in the smallest way, you are rebuilding something powerful. You are rebuilding your sense of self. You are teaching yourself that you are safe to exist without performing. You are proving to yourself that your voice matters. You are reminding yourself that you are worthy, not because of what you do, but because of who you are. And that is the shift from performing to proving to simply being. Because at your core, beyond every expectation, beyond every label, beyond every role, you are already enough. Not when you achieve more, not when you please everyone, not when you become perfect, but now. And the moment you begin to live from that truth, performance loses its power and identity finds its voice. Self-worth is not something you are supposed to earn. It is something you are meant to realize. But when a daughter is raised by narcissistic parents, that truth is quietly replaced with a different belief, one that reshapes how she sees herself for years, sometimes for a lifetime. She learns not through direct teaching, but through repeated experience that her value is conditional. That love is not a constant, it is a reward. And once that belief takes root, it does not stay in childhood. It grows with her. From the beginning, approval becomes the language of connection. When she performs well, behaves perfectly, or reflects positively on the parent, she receives attention, praise, or temporary affection. But when she expresses her own needs, makes mistakes, or steps outside expectations, the response shifts: criticism, withdrawal, or emotional distance. This inconsistency creates confusion, not because she lacks understanding, but because the rules keep changing. So she begins to form a conclusion that feels logical in that environment. If I do the right things, I will be loved. If I don't, I will lose it. That belief becomes the foundation of her self-worth. Now listen closely. This is where the shift happens internally. Instead of developing a stable sense of value from within, she builds it on external responses. Her worth becomes tied to outcomes, to reactions, to validation. It is no longer something she carries, it is something she chases. And the problem with chasing worth is this: no matter how fast you run, it always feels just out of reach. As she grows older, this pattern becomes more refined, more hidden, but no less powerful. You will see her striving, achieving, giving more than expected, trying harder than necessary. From the outside, it looks like ambition, discipline, even excellence. But internally, it is often driven by a quiet pressure, a need to prove that she is enough. And here's the truth most people miss. When your self-worth is conditional, success does not feel like fulfillment. It feels like relief. Relief that for a moment you have done enough to deserve acceptance. Relief that for a moment the inner critic goes silent. But it is temporary. Because conditional self-worth always resets the standard. What was enough yesterday is no longer enough today. So she keeps going. She raises the bar, pushes harder, demands more from herself. Not because she doesn't appreciate her achievements, but because she does not feel anchored in them. She cannot rest in her accomplishments because her sense of worth was never designed to be stable. It was designed to be earned. And that creates a fragile foundation. Because anything built on conditions can be shaken by change. A mistake, a rejection, a criticism. These moments do not just feel like isolated events. They feel like confirmations of a deeper fear. Maybe I'm not enough after all. And that fear does not come from the present moment. It echoes from the past. Now understand this clearly. Fragility does not mean weakness. It means instability. It means her sense of self can rise and fall based on external feedback. One compliment can lift her. One critique can break her confidence. Not because she lacks strength, but because her value has been placed in the hands of others. And when your worth is in someone else's hands, you will constantly seek their approval, even at the cost of yourself. This is why you may see her overextending in relationships, giving more than she receives, staying longer than she should, tolerating behavior that does not align with her values. Because deep down there is a belief: if I can just do enough, be enough, give enough, I will finally be valued. But the painful truth is this: when self-worth is conditional, no amount of external validation will ever feel permanent. It's like trying to fill a space that was never meant to be filled from the outside. And so the cycle continues. She doubts herself, then seeks reassurance. She achieves something, then questions if it's enough. She receives love, then fears losing it. This constant internal movement creates exhaustion, not physical but emotional. A kind of fatigue that comes from always trying to secure something that should have been given freely in the first place. But here's where the awakening begins. The moment she starts to recognize the pattern, she gains a new perspective. She begins to see that her worth has been measured by standards that were never truly hers. She realizes that the voice telling her she is not enough is not an absolute truth. It is a learned belief. And once a belief is recognized as learned, it can be unlearned. But unlearning is not immediate. It requires intention, awareness, and most importantly, patience. Because you are not just changing thoughts, you are changing a system that has been reinforced over years. The first step is understanding that worth is not something you prove, it is something you accept. That may sound simple, but it challenges everything she has been taught. It means recognizing that mistakes do not reduce your value. It means understanding that rejection does not define your worth. It means accepting that you do not have to earn what should have been unconditional. And that shift changes everything. Because when worth becomes internal, it becomes stable. It no longer rises and falls with every opinion. It no longer depends on constant validation. It becomes something you carry with you regardless of circumstances. Now listen carefully. This does not mean you stop growing, achieving, or improving. It means your motivation changes. You no longer act from a place of proving. You act from a place of expressing. You achieve not to feel worthy, but because you already are. You set boundaries not to gain approval, but because you respect yourself. You choose relationships not based on validation, but on alignment. That is the difference between conditional and secure self-worth. One is driven by fear, the other by clarity. And yes, the transition can feel uncomfortable because for so long, your identity has been connected to external feedback. Letting go of that dependency can feel like losing control. But in reality, you are gaining something far more powerful. You are reclaiming ownership of your value. There will be moments when the old patterns try to return. Moments when you feel the urge to prove yourself, to seek validation, to question your worth. That is normal. It does not mean you are failing. It means you are aware. And awareness gives you choice. In those moments, you can pause and remind yourself, my worth is not on trial. I do not need to earn what is already mine. I am allowed to exist without proving my value. These are not just affirmations, they are corrections. Corrections to beliefs that were formed in environments where love was conditional. And over time, with repetition and intention, those corrections become your new foundation. You begin to trust yourself more. You begin to rely less on external approval. You begin to feel a sense of stability that does not depend on circumstances. And that is what secure self-worth feels like. It is not loud. It is not arrogant. It is quiet, steady, and grounded. It does not need constant reassurance because it is not built on uncertainty. It knows. It knows that you are enough, not because of what you achieve, but because of who you are. It knows that your value does not decrease because someone fails to recognize it. It knows that you do not need to perform to belong. You already do. And once you reach that place, everything changes. You stop chasing approval. You stop over-explaining your choices. You stop shrinking to fit expectations. And instead, you start living from a place of truth. Because the reality is this, your worth was never meant to be fragile. It was never meant to depend on conditions. It was never meant to be negotiated. It was always meant to be known. And the moment you begin to truly understand that, the need to prove yourself begins to fade. And in its place, something stronger emerges. A sense of self that cannot be easily shaken. A confidence that is not dependent on applause. A peace that comes from finally knowing you were always enough. Emotions are not a weakness. They are signals, guidance, a language your inner self uses to communicate what is right, what is wrong, what feels safe, and what feels harmful. But when a daughter is raised in a narcissistic environment, that language is interrupted, distorted, and often silenced altogether. And over time, what should have been her greatest internal guidance system becomes something she questions, suppresses, or even fears. From early childhood, she begins to notice something important. Her emotions are not always welcomed. When she expresses sadness, she may be told she is too sensitive. When she shows anger, she may be labeled disrespectful. When she shares excitement, it may be dismissed or overshadowed. Slowly, she starts to understand that her feelings are inconvenient in the space she lives in. So she adapts. She learns that expressing emotion can lead to conflict, rejection, or invalidation. And because connection is essential for a child's survival, she begins to prioritize acceptance over authenticity. She starts to filter herself, to measure what she feels before she shows it, to silence emotions before they reach the surface. Now understand this clearly. When emotions are consistently dismissed, a child does not stop feeling. She stops expressing. And that suppression does not disappear. It goes inward. This is where internal conflict begins to form. Because on one side, there is what she genuinely feels: hurt, confusion, frustration, longing. And on the other side, there is what she has been taught is acceptable: calm, quiet, agreeable, control. These two realities begin to clash. She feels one thing but believes she should feel another. So she questions herself. Am I overreacting? Am I being too emotional? Maybe it's not that serious. These thoughts become automatic, not because they are true, but because they were reinforced over time. And the more she questions her own feelings, the more disconnected she becomes from them. Now listen carefully. This disconnection is not harmless. It has consequences. Because when you lose trust in your emotions, you lose trust in your instincts. You begin to second guess your reactions. You hesitate before speaking. You doubt your interpretations of situations. Even when something feels wrong, you may convince yourself that it isn't. Not because you lack awareness, but because you were conditioned to override it. And this creates a dangerous pattern. She may find herself in situations where her boundaries are crossed, but she stays silent. She may feel discomfort in relationships, but she dismisses it. She may sense that something is off, but she ignores the signal. Why? Because she was trained to believe that her emotional responses are unreliable. But the truth is this: her emotions were never the problem. The environment was. Now let's go deeper. Emotional suppression does not mean emotions disappear. It means they are stored. And what is stored does not stay still. It builds. It accumulates. It waits for expression. This is why later in life she may experience moments where emotions feel overwhelming or confusing. A small situation may trigger a strong reaction. A minor conflict may feel intense, not because she is overreacting, but because the emotion carries layers of unexpressed feelings from the past. It is not just about the present moment. It is about everything that was never allowed to be processed. And when emotions remain unprocessed, they create internal noise. She may feel anxious without understanding why. She may feel disconnected even in meaningful relationships. She may struggle to identify what she truly feels in certain situations. This is the internal conflict, the gap between what is felt and what is acknowledged. And living in that gap is exhausting, because part of her is trying to express while another part is trying to suppress. One part is seeking clarity while another is creating doubt. It becomes a constant internal tension, a quiet battle that no one else can see. But here is the turning point. The moment she begins to understand that her emotional suppression was learned, not natural, she gains a new perspective. She realizes that her difficulty with emotions is not a flaw, but a response to her environment. And that realization opens the door to change. Because if something is learned, it can be relearned. Reconnecting with emotions is not about becoming overly expressive or reactive. It is about rebuilding trust with yourself. It is about allowing your feelings to exist without immediately judging them. It starts with awareness, noticing what you feel without trying to fix it, acknowledging discomfort without dismissing it, allowing emotions to surface without labeling them as wrong. These are small steps, but they are powerful, because every time you acknowledge an emotion without judgment, you send yourself a new message. My feelings are valid. Now understand this: validation does not mean every emotion leads to action. It means every emotion is worthy of recognition. You can feel anger without acting aggressively. You can feel sadness without losing control. You can feel fear without being weak. Emotions are information, not instructions. And when you begin to see them that way, the fear of feeling starts to fade. But there is another layer to this. Reconnecting with emotions also means learning to express them in a healthy way. And for someone who has spent years suppressing, this can feel unfamiliar, even uncomfortable. Speaking honestly about your feelings may feel risky. Setting boundaries may feel unnatural. Saying "this hurt me" may feel difficult. But discomfort in this process is not a sign of failure. It is a sign of growth, because you are doing something you were never allowed to do before. You are giving your emotions a voice. And that voice does not have to be loud to be powerful. It just has to be honest. Now let me be clear. This journey is not about blaming the past. It is about understanding it so you can change your relationship with yourself. You are not trying to become someone new. You are trying to reconnect with who you have always been beneath the conditioning. A person with emotions that matter. A person with instincts that are valid. A person whose inner voice deserves to be heard. And as you continue this process, something begins to shift. The confusion starts to clear. The internal noise starts to quiet. The doubt starts to weaken. And in its place, a sense of clarity begins to grow. You start to recognize what feels right and what doesn't. You begin to trust your reactions instead of questioning them. You feel more aligned with yourself, more grounded in your experiences. This is what happens when emotional suppression is replaced with emotional awareness. The internal conflict begins to resolve because now, instead of fighting your emotions, you are listening to them. Instead of suppressing your feelings, you are understanding them. Instead of doubting yourself, you are trusting your inner voice. And that changes everything. Because when you trust your emotions, you make better decisions. When you understand your feelings, you set clearer boundaries. When you honor your inner experience, you build a stronger connection with yourself. This is not just emotional growth, it is personal empowerment. You are no longer controlled by what you were taught to suppress. You are guided by what you have learned to understand. And that is the shift from silence to expression, from confusion to clarity, from disconnection to alignment. Because your emotions were never meant to be hidden. They were meant to guide you, to protect you, to connect you to yourself. And the moment you allow them to do that, the internal conflict begins to fade. And in its place, something powerful emerges. A sense of self that is not only aware, but aligned. And when you are aligned with yourself, you no longer need to question your voice because you finally trust it. Patterns are powerful. They do not ask for permission and they do not announce themselves. They operate quietly, beneath awareness, guiding decisions, shaping relationships, and influencing the kind of love a person believes they deserve. For a daughter raised by narcissistic parents, patterns are not just habits. They are survival strategies that followed her out of childhood and into adulthood. Understand this clearly. The environment you grow up in becomes the blueprint for what feels familiar. And what feels familiar often feels safe, even when it is not healthy. As a child, she learned how to navigate unpredictable emotional terrain. She learned how to read moods, how to anticipate reactions, how to adjust herself to avoid conflict or gain approval. These skills were necessary at the time. They helped her survive. But survival skills, when carried into adult relationships without awareness, can recreate the very conditions she once endured. This is where repetition begins. She may find herself drawn to people who are emotionally distant, inconsistent, or controlling. Not because she consciously desires that, but because something about it feels known. It mirrors the emotional landscape she was conditioned to understand. And the mind often chooses familiarity over uncertainty, even if that familiarity is painful. Now listen carefully, this is not a flaw in her character. It is a reflection of her conditioning. Because when love in childhood was something to be earned, unpredictable, or tied to performance, she may unconsciously seek relationships that require the same effort. She may feel a sense of purpose in trying to win someone's affection, to prove her worth, to finally receive the consistency she lacked. But here is the truth. When you try to heal a wound in the same environment that created it, you often deepen it instead. She may overgive in relationships, offering time, energy, emotional support, hoping it will lead to reciprocity. She may tolerate behavior that does not align with her values, convincing herself that patience or understanding will eventually change the dynamic. She may ignore red flags, not because she cannot see them, but because she has been trained to normalize them. And at the center of it all is a belief, often unspoken but deeply felt. If I try hard enough, I can make this work. That belief comes from a place of resilience, but it can also lead to self-neglect. Because relationships are not meant to be projects you fix. They are connections you experience. And when you are constantly trying to earn love, you are not experiencing it fully. You are chasing it. Now understand this. This pattern does not only appear in romantic relationships. It can show up in friendships, in work environments, in any space where connection and validation are involved. She may become the one who always supports others but struggles to ask for support herself. The one who listens, gives, adjusts, but rarely receives the same depth in return. The one who stays longer than she should, hoping things will change even when the pattern remains the same. Why? because leaving feels unfamiliar. Choosing differently feels uncertain, and uncertainty can feel more threatening than discomfort when you have been conditioned to manage discomfort for so long. But here is where awareness becomes power. The moment she begins to recognize that her relationship patterns are not random but rooted in her past, something shifts. She starts to see connections between what she experienced and what she continues to allow. She begins to understand that what feels normal is not always what is healthy. And that realization can be uncomfortable because it challenges long-held beliefs. It requires her to question dynamics she once accepted. It asks her to step out of familiarity and into something new. But growth always requires a level of discomfort. Now listen, breaking patterns is not about blaming yourself for past choices. It is about recognizing them so you can make different ones moving forward. It starts with observation, noticing the kind of people you are drawn to, noticing how you behave in relationships, noticing where you overextend, where you stay silent, where you ignore your own needs. This is not judgment, it is awareness. And awareness creates space for change. Because once you see the pattern, you are no longer fully controlled by it. You can pause, reflect, choose differently. Now understand this, choosing differently does not always feel natural at first. Setting boundaries may feel uncomfortable. Walking away from familiar dynamics may feel difficult. Choosing people who offer consistency and respect may even feel unfamiliar. But unfamiliar does not mean wrong. It means new. And new is necessary if you want different outcomes. One of the most important shifts she must make is redefining what love means. Love is not something you have to chase. Love is not something you have to earn through sacrifice. Love is not something that requires you to lose yourself in the process. Real love is consistent. It is respectful. It allows space for both people to exist fully without constant adjustment or fear of rejection. And accepting that kind of love requires a change in self-perception, because you cannot consistently choose healthy relationships if you do not believe you deserve them. This is where self-worth and patterns intersect. As she begins to rebuild her sense of worth, her tolerance for unhealthy dynamics begins to decrease. She starts to recognize when something does not align with her values. She becomes more willing to step away from situations that no longer serve her. Not out of anger, but out of clarity. And clarity is powerful because it removes confusion. It replaces doubt with understanding. It allows her to see situations for what they are rather than what she hopes they will become. Now listen carefully. Breaking patterns is not a single decision. It is a series of choices made consistently over time. Choosing to speak up when you would have stayed silent. Choosing to walk away when you would have stayed. Choosing to prioritize your well-being when you would have overgiven. Each choice may seem small, but together they create a new direction. And over time, those new choices become new patterns. Patterns that are not based on survival but on self-respect. Patterns that are not driven by fear but by intention. Patterns that reflect who you are becoming, not what you have experienced. There may still be moments when the old patterns try to resurface. Moments when familiarity pulls you back, when doubt whispers that maybe you are asking for too much, expecting too much, wanting too much. But understand this, you are not asking for too much. You are asking for what was missing. And there is nothing wrong with that. What matters is how you respond in those moments. Do you return to what is familiar even if it hurts? Or do you stand in what you know is right even if it feels uncomfortable? That choice defines your growth, because every time you choose alignment over familiarity, you weaken the old pattern and strengthen the new one. And eventually something changes. You begin to feel more at peace in your relationships. You feel less need to prove yourself. You experience connection without constant effort or anxiety. That is what healthy patterns create. They do not drain you, they support you. They do not confuse you, they ground you. They do not require you to lose yourself. They allow you to be fully present. And this is the life you were always meant to experience. Not one where you are constantly trying to earn love, but one where you can receive it without question. Not one where you are adjusting yourself to fit others, but one where you are accepted as you are. Breaking the cycle is not easy. It requires awareness, courage, and consistency. But it is possible. And the moment you begin to choose differently, you begin to create a future that is not defined by your past. Because your past may explain your patterns, but it does not have to control them. And once you understand that, you step into a new level of freedom. A freedom where you are no longer repeating what hurt you, but building something that heals you. And that is where transformation truly begins.